Are we seeing steps in the right direction for unity of all in the United States? This as a recent viral clip of Ty Smith in his argument against instituting CRT in his local school said this.
You gonna deliberately teach kids this white kid right here got it better than you because he white? You gonna purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed? How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed?
So, who is right? Well, to discuss, we have conservative commentator Malik Abdul and New Journey's Chief of Staff AJ Swinson giving us the 360 view. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Scotty.
Thank you.
So, AJ, I have to start with you. Are you happy with where the conversation regarding race relations in America is going right now?
You know, we're going to need more time to figure things out, to end some of the disunity and divisiveness. That's to be expected. Abraham Lincoln said that if we release African Americans, if we release these slaves, how are they going to live amongst the people where they were enslaved? So this was expected. We knew that it would take time for us to come back together and heal. And I think our country has made major advancements in that area. Are we finished? No. But we've made great progress, and that should be celebrated. And we should stop any attempt of the left to act as if this is still the KKK-run white supremacist country that it was back then.
Well, Malik, in addressing then AJ's comments, do you feel like projects like the critical race theory, which, by the way, have been around for more than 40 years, they're just now starting to come back into the headlines, that they're actually bringing accuracy to the present reporting of the past, which I'm all for, or is there more distortion to fit a political ideology, which some have criticized what it's been teaching?
I think both people on the left and on the right are actually conflating two things. So what the national conversation is about critical race theory, but what Republicans and conservatives are really objecting to is what they call anti-racist training. The anti-racist training is exactly what we saw last year with the Smithsonian deciding to pull a flyer that they pulled out. Essentially, it was titled Some Assumptions About White Culture. And in those assumptions about white culture, we read things like white people, for instance, are more objective. They have, believe in nuclear families, individualism, and things like that. They actually pulled that in response to the criticism that they got from Donald Trump at a time. So really what Republicans are against is anti-racist training, but the national discussion that we're having is that it's critical race theory. Anti-race training borrows from critical race theory, but it in and of itself is not critical race theory, if that makes sense. I know it's a lot to unpack.
And it's a lot of clarification on it. And I think that's a conversation that is happening, but a lot of this comes from what the events of last year. We've been talking about this, obviously, for over a decade, but it's really seemed to be a common conversation. And like I said, we just have the federal holiday appointed. So, AJ, 1 year since major riots broke out in Minneapolis and beyond, do you think America is still as incendiary today as it was a year ago, or are these conversations and these steps forward actually helping and saying, okay, let's handle this a different way and maybe we can see some productivity happen?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we've seen in the past, riots do not typically bring about lasting change. What happens is politicians will seek to pacify people. We have not seen anything monumental, anything that would actually address any of the issues that we have. What we've seen is pushing diversity training. What we've seen is a Juneteenth holiday, which, although I think is a positive thing, it's not solving any of the issues that people were complaining about. And I want to point out that a lot of these issues are local issues. And as far as critical race theory argues, yes, a lot of this anti-racist training is borrowing from critical race theory, which is encouraging people to focus on race, to go against meritocracy, to go against anything that has traditional values, and to instead overhaul our system and to preach systemic racism to children. How is that helping? And yet Joe Biden is pushing CRT training into our public school system. So everything that's happening right now is only going to make the situation worse and is not going to prevent any further rioting or issues.
Well, and Malik, talking about what happened, and I hear what you're saying, AJ, on this. You know, the district attorney in New York has dropped the charges for over 100 looters from last summer's riots. They're in New York City. Mayors are running on that issue alone, mayoral candidates. You know, I don't see this as a race issue, except the riots were racially charged and the fact that the DA dropped it. Do you think this was a right move? And how do you think this is being perceived outside of New York City, but the rest of the country, when they see businesses being burned down to the ground and nobody being held accountable for that action?
Wow, look at this. This feels so natural.
Yeah, so remember around this time last year, at the height of the riots, the conversation on the left was, well, these are just businesses. They can rebuild. There was a lot of defending essentially every single thing that happened. And you had candidates like Kamala Harris at the time, who was actually encouraging people to bail out those who were actually arrested for causing this type of mayhem. So the idea that they're now not deciding not to charge or releasing these 100 or plus looters, that's not surprising, because the narrative that Democrats wanted to push out there is that businesses can rebuild, Black lives can't. It is the greatest grift that we've seen over the past year.
At the same time, AJ, those businesses are not rebuilding. Despite all the stimulus funds, we're seeing there was already a hurtful economy. How much damage did this do within the own communities that were damaged? And we're not seeing those places being able to open up. In fact, they've already been targeted before. Is this going to have a long-term effect in the negative? And maybe this is why it's better to have the conversation like what we're seeing what happened with Juneteenth, as well as even the critical race, some of the anti-racism conversations going on in schools.
Well, yes, $1 to $2 billion they're estimating have happened in damages of the largely peaceful protests. And we have to keep this in mind, that you're incentivizing the wrong behavior. Like I said before, riots have not brought long-lasting change in this country. They've brought things that pacify people without anything that really actually changes the issues that we have. Are we seeing real police reform being passed? Not yet. Are we seeing real things happen that need to happen as far as economic revitalization? How many Black-owned businesses were destroyed in these riots that will never reopen? So the damage of these riots far supersedes anything positive that could come from it. So we need to ask these Democratic politicians to stop incentivizing rioting and destruction and to get to work fixing the system that they're constantly complaining about.
Well, I think one thing that we need to focus, that we don't focus on enough, is that America is actually the most diverse country in the world. There is no gold standard in history on how to integrate all of these multiple cultures to live in unity, and it was not going to be done overnight. Time will continue to grade how well the USA has handled it. Thank you both for joining me, AJ and Malik.
Thanks, guys.